federal appeals court late last night paused a ruling, a very brief one, that required President Donald Trump to return control of the California National Guard to the state after he seized it to deploy against protesters in Los Angeles. Senior US District Judge Charles Breyer had ruled that Trump unlawfully federalized thousands of members of California's National Guard and would have to return control by, well, right around now, actually, if it hadn't been paused. And it has been, but we will still want to give you some of the ruling because this process is not done, and that original ruling has some pretty good points in it. He said Trump's actions were illegal, both exceeding the scope of his statutory authority and violating the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. He must therefore return control of the California National Guard to the governor of the state of California forthwith. Which is a word we should bring back, I think. Regardless of whether defendants gave Governor Newsom an opportunity to consult with them or consent to the federalization of California's National Guard, they did not issue their orders through him and thus failed to comply with federal law. They didn't do any of that, he just took it. Not only did he not work with Gavin Newsom, California, the mayor of LA, the LAPD were all saying we don't need this, but they had different goals in mind than Donald Trump perhaps. And in addition to that, the judge outright rejected the idea that what's happening in downtown LA is an insurrection, saying violence is necessary for a rebellion, but it is not sufficient. Even accepting the questionable premise that people armed with fireworks, rocks, mangoes, concrete, chairs, or bottles of liquid are armed in a 1903 sense, the court is aware of no evidence in the record of actual firearms. There is little evidence of whether the violent protesters' actions were open or avowed. Nor is there evidence that any of the violent protesters were attempting to overthrow the government as a whole. The evidence is overwhelming that protesters gathered to protest a single issue, the immigration raids. And he concludes saying, the court is troubled by the implication inherent in defendants' argument that protest against the federal government, a core civil liberty protected by the First Amendment, can justify a finding of rebellion. The idea that protesters can so quickly cross the line between protected conduct and rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States is untenable and dangerous. And I would really love for judges, not just him, but at higher levels, the Supreme Court, to make very clear that simply because you disagree with Donald Trump and you're out in public, that that's a rebellion. If that's allowed to stand, and I worry that the Supreme Court will allow it to, well then kiss the Constitution goodbye. The First Amendment isn't worth the paper that it was originally written on at that point. And Donald Trump is doing it against this protest, against the protests involving ICE, but he'll do the same thing against the No Kings protest, if he protests against his parade, if he protests for women's right to control what happens to her body. He does not tolerate people disagreeing with him. Very few people on the right do these days. And so at least temporarily we had a judge on our side. Now, it was appealed and the 3 judges of the Ninth Circuit, they did temporarily block it. So he does have control throughout this weekend. So that's concerning. They're gonna be holding a hearing on Tuesday though. And in advance of that, Donald Trump thanked them for the ruling, saying that if he hadn't sent the military to LA, the city would have burned down by now, which maybe he's right about that. I'm not sure. 50-50 chance that LA would have been entirely burned to the ground if he hadn't instigated further violence.
Yeah, so, okay, let's start with free speech. Earlier, last I checked in on the right wing, before the election, they were massively in favor of free speech. Right after the election, oh, you're doing a protest of ICE or Trump, bring in the Marines. Well, if you bring in the Marines, you could cancel some people. So that's certainly for sure. Okay, now guys, I'm not talking about the guys who did property damage and etc. I'll get back to them in a second, okay? I'm aware that they exist, okay? Who started it? I started it. They fired flashbang grenades into the crowd. The crowd wasn't doing anything. They had actually ICE had stopped traffic. And then people started recording, and when they started recording, ICE got mad and they started this whole mess. And when you get hit in the head with a tear gas canister, you tend to want to throw something back, okay? So that's the genesis of how it started. Okay, then later there were different things that devolved, right? Now, why am I against it overall? Because we're not a developing country or a banana republic, and I don't like to see the military patrolling the streets of the US. Also, we have laws against the military patrolling inside the US. Also, don't tread on me. I was told that we should be really careful about tyrannical government bringing in the military to oppress us. And here's Trump doing it, and the right wing's like, yes, finally, tyrannical government to rule us all with a heavy hand in all of our cities. No. And then why is Trump constantly looking for abusing the Constitution, abusing our laws, overreaching his authority, constantly looking to be more in favor of an authoritarian government? So real quick, yeah,
can I just jump in with just a bit of breaking news? So this is obviously against the law and all of that, but the Marines apparently, as of 30 minutes ago, it was reported, have done at least the first detention of a civilian in LA. So the Marines are exercising arrest authority in an American city.
Not just the National Guard, which he can't call in without a governor's permission, which is actually what Trump said earlier, and many people in his administration and even Kash Patel said he can't do it, right? Except he is doing it. He's clearly violating the law because he loves violating the law. He wants to be a dictator so badly. And guys, look, if you're MAGA and you're like, oh, no way, man, you guys have TDS and all that stuff. Look, Trump's a simple guy. So what does he want? He wants money. So that's why when he says, they asked him once, hey, the Saudis, it looks like they might be money laundering through Trump Tower and stuff. And Trump said, they give me $30-40 million an apartment. What am I gonna do, say no? No, I'm gonna take it. Simple guy, you give me money, I do what you want, okay? And then what is the other thing he wants? Power. So he thinks, why wouldn't I take more power? I'm the president, I should be able to do whatever I want. No, that's not how the presidency works. You're thinking about a king. He's like, yeah, that sounds good. Me want more money, me want more power. Me have military in the streets, run tyrannical government, perfect. That way I could tread on you, but you can't tread on me. Me, more power. Okay, look, it's not to say that people didn't do wrong things. So I'm gonna address that real quick and then I'm gonna kick it over to Maz. Guys, if you're in these protests, I know the cops, not just the military, but the cops we've shown it on TYT, go onto our live vertical and watch for hours. We cover the protests and you see horses trampling on protesters, etc., right? So that has happened. But did some people commit violence and property damage? Yes, they did. Should they be considered part of our allies and protesters and our side? No, turn them in, okay? Don't listen to radical idiots telling you, oh, they're just, they're just protesting. They're not protesting. The civil rights movement would never tolerate violence because it destroyed the movement. It would allow, back then, racist people to go, you see, black people are all violent. That is why they policed themselves and made sure there was no violence, so there would be no excuse for the authorities to commit much bigger violence on them. So if you see anyone in a protest doing violence, burning a Waymo, burning things down, doing property damage on innocent people's homes, business, etc., turn them in. They are not on your side. They're the ones who are actually making you look terrible and hurting the immigrants, hurting our communities. They're so counterproductive. It makes me wonder if they're a false flag operation, right? Because if you were a right winger and you wanted to turn all sympathy against LA, against the cities, against our communities, against immigrants, you would go in, burn a bunch of things down, burn the American flag, and act like the idiots who broke the law did. You've got to get rid of those people. You've got to keep it peaceful so that we're on the moral high ground and we win. I know radicals will say, no, violence is the answer because they're stupid.
Well, Cenk, I'm happy to hear you say what you just said, because when the MAGA attacked the Capitol on January 6th, one of the defenses that people that were supporters of MAGA were saying, well, what about the protests in Portland? What about the protests there? What about the rioters in these protests? And it's always amazing that people that are open-minded to anything will say, yeah, they should be arrested as well. If you broke the law, you should be arrested. Therefore, the people who stormed the Capitol should be arrested and not pardoned the way Trump pardoned them. Actual criminals doing crimes, actually going after cops, actually killing people in those protests, wanting to hang Mike Pence. So it's just very rich that those people will excuse and say, oh, the insurrectionists were tourists, and here we are at a protest that's mostly peaceful with some people who are rioters, and you go, okay, arrest the rioters. Yes, arrest the rioters. But what's happened also is, I think, by bringing in the authorities and all these other, the National Guard and now the Marines, you're escalating the tension, you're elevating the tension. And what's crazy, first of all, is we live in Los Angeles, and we know that what was happening was in a pretty small area. But people outside of Los Angeles, when they see the footage, the press, the way the press has covered it, it looked like the city was burning down. And so I had several people reaching out to me. I just did a show in Hermosa Beach, which, as you guys know, is about 45 minutes away from downtown LA. It's its own community. And I had somebody call me from San Diego saying, oh, I bought tickets to come to your show, but then I saw the riots and the curfew, so I'm not gonna come. And I was like, it's in Hermosa Beach. There's nothing going on. So the press has not done a good job of indicating that the protests aren't as violent as these images show. And also, Trump has even come to admit that he was wrong with his policy. We saw that he came out and said, oh, the raids of farm workers and some of these other people that are working is not a good thing because it's hurting the farms, it's hurting these businesses. And it all goes back to, when they originally said that we are gonna deport undocumented violent criminals. And they've come to realize there just aren't that many of them. So now they're just going after undocumented people. So really the bigger threat to Los Angeles are not the protesters, but ICE. And they're going to car washes, they're going to schools, they're going to places where people that are here that are trying to become legal are showing up in courthouses for hearings, and they're being arrested and deported. So that needs to be shown more and more in the news. That needs to be shown more and more to the MAGA world for them to realize that this is all a big play to distract from some of his policies that have been failures, from his tariffs, from the big beautiful bill that's going to take away a bunch of people's insurance. And so this is their way. This is Stephen Miller's way of going in. Stephen Miller called for a quota. When you call for a quota of deportations, nothing good comes from that, because when you call for a quota, we know that now those people that are authorities are going to try and fill those quotas. So they're standing there in schools and just taking parents away from children, parents that haven't committed any crimes. They've been here for many, many years, leading a good life, trying to be good citizens, causing fewer problems than American citizens do. So once again, I will say that this is all something that has been, drummed up by the Trump administration to distract from a lot of his failures, and a lot of his base is buying into it. But even he has realized it's bad policy, as he realizes that this is going to hurt our economy, the workers that were picking the strawberries, the workers that were cooking and doing construction, and all of that stuff are just being deported. It's so plain to see.
Yeah. So last things for me, some of MAGA is saying, "Oh my God, you see LA is such a mess." He had to call in the National Guard. He had to call in the Marines. Remind me if there was anything going on in LA before ICE came in. No, nothing. Perfectly peaceful. There's nothing going on. ICE comes in, does the raid, and then attacks the people who they stopped in traffic, and then a melee breaks out because they started attacking the. Now, in the beginning, it wasn't even protesters, it was bystanders who were looking like, "Wait, what's going on?" And they were filming it. They're like, "How dare you film it?" That's it. ICE attacks. ICE brought this problem. So as a matter of fact, there's no question. You can say, hey, ICE needs to bring that problem to each city. They need to do these raids, and then they need to bring in the Marines, and they need to take over all of the cities. That's again, very curious stance from guys who warned me about the tyranny of government and how we shouldn't let these troops, and they had practiced fighting them in the woods when they came. Brother, they're not in the woods, they're in LA, right? And then lastly, look, both sides, please be consistent. So the MAGA guys go, those January 6th guys, you make it seem like it was just a big giant riot, but most of the people who were at the speech were perfectly peaceful, so it was mainly peaceful. You sound just like the left, right? The protests were largely peaceful, and there's a couple of idiots who did something wrong, and then they should be arrested. You know why you sound like the left? Because that is true. Most of these protests on the left and Donald Trump's speech, the majority of people were peaceful. But should we arrest the people who committed violence? Well, of course we should. They could bust into the Capitol talking about murdering Mike Pence. What are you gonna do? And then they beat the cops with sticks. We're not gonna arrest them? Of course you have to arrest them. And then if you're on the left, if you say, of course you have to arrest those guys, don't you obviously also have to arrest the guy who burned the Waymo and who threw a brick through a window? Of course you do, of course you do. Arrest the people doing the violence with local law enforcement, okay? And let the protests go on otherwise. And do not bring the military into any of our cities. If Donald Trump's crowning achievement might be, oh, congratulations, America. I didn't make America great again. I made America a banana republic for the first time. I don't want it, nobody wants it, but unfortunately we're stuck with it. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.